Thank you for having me. I'm Grace Kast. I'm the Executive Officer of the Gateway Water Management Authority. And the reason why I'm here today is I also serve on the Greater Los Angeles Disadvantaged Community Committee, and I'm the co-chair on the much larger DACIP, which is what I'll be talking about today. Lynn, who is you saw on the camera, is my fellow co-chair. So later on, she and I will, on the breakout session, try to do a little bit more of an interactive feedback once I describe what the program is. Disadvantaged communities. I heard earlier in the presentation there was a definition using Cal EnviroScreen. And in this case, when it comes to this program, they use a different term, and that's it's used by the state of California for this program. And a disadvantaged community is defined as an economically distressed, underrepresented community and or populations with less than 80% of the state median household income. So all of the other factors in the Cal EnviroScreen are not part of this definition. This is the straight definition by the Department of Water Resources for this program. The Greater LA County, which I will call GLAC, because there's so many acronyms because these names and titles get so long. So I'm trying to shorten a little bit with some acronyms. So Greater LA County is GLAC, and it includes 9.8 million residents, of which 42% fall into that category I just described. So it's a pretty hefty number. What's interesting is that that's just what we know. And so what we have to find out is who don't we know? The census, as you know, doesn't capture everybody. And so we have to figure out, you know, who else do we need to be reaching out to? And that's part of what this program I'm going to talk about today is about. The DACIP, which is the Disadvantaged Community Involvement Program, and that's the acronym once again, it was approved as part of the Proposition 1 back in 2014, and it was known as the water bond. The guidelines for this program were developed by the State Department of Water Resources in 2016, so it took a while to set up all the guidelines and parameters and criteria for it. And DWR had 3 objectives for this program, and I will quote, work collaboratively to involve the DACs, the disadvantaged communities, community-based organizations, and stakeholders in, and I highlighted the acronym IRWIN, which I will describe in a little bit, which stands for Integrated Regional Water Management Planning Efforts, to ensure balanced access and opportunity for participation in the IRWIN process, planning process. Increase the understanding and, where necessary, identify the water management needs of the disadvantaged communities, and develop strategies and long-term solutions that appropriately address the identified disadvantaged community water management needs. And I want to point out again that word identified, because we don't know all of them. We don't have them all identified. And so again, that's a purpose of this program, is to find out who has not been identified. So what is IRWIN? I mentioned that earlier in that the objectives by the State Department of Water Resources. It stands for Integrated Regional Water Management. And that began way back in 2002 by the state legislature for the Department of Water Resources to put into play. And what it is a collaborative effort to identify and implement water management solutions on a regional scale. So they wanted people to work together and develop strategies across boundaries, multi-benefit, all of those things, and come to them and say, this is what we need to do for our region, for our area. That's what their focus was. Throughout California, they wanted regions to get together and work together and come with solutions and plans and projects and so forth, and to work collaboratively. And then it was also to increase regional self-reliance. What they wanted is bottoms up. They wanted the folks down at the ground level to work together, shake hands across boundaries. You know, hey, do you have a project that does this? And I have a project that does this. And that person has a project that does that. Can we make it one project? And that was the whole point of what this IRWIMP was supposed to do, and is doing. It was supposed to reduce conflict and manage water to concurrently achieve social, environmental, and economic objectives. So that's what IRWIMP was. So as it progressed, they noticed that some of the lacking parts of this was the disadvantaged community involvement. And you can see why. If you look at this IRWIMP, which I mentioned earlier is a region, this region for the greater LA County is that big. So so the only way to manage it was to maybe break it down into sub-regions, and so by watersheds, sub-watersheds I should say, and they got together and said, okay, these are going to be the 5 areas that work together under the greater LA County IRWIMP plan. There's your 9.8 million people, and that's a hard thing to do. So where does this DACIP, this Disadvantaged Community Involvement Program, fit? If you look left to right, and I highlighted the bolded one so you can see kind of the direct link, but in essence, the Integrated Regional Water Management Program, first, is there a pointer on here? Yeah, I'll go like this. Oh, you can see it on there. Up at the top in the middle, IRWIMP regions first would have to be identified. They have to come across boundaries and say, you know, let's work together, and let's go to the Department of Water Resources and say, okay, we have a region, we want to work together on stuff, and they say, and they review it, and they go, yeah, that sounds like a good plan, and they accept it, and then you move on, and you start developing plans, the IRWIMP plans, over to the right on the top. And then you also create a governing body. You have to figure out how you're going to work together, because if you're going to do projects together and apply for grants and all this, you have to have some sort of structure. And so that is the top part. That's just the planning and all the stuff that you need to do to get to a point where you can actually do activities together. So that goes down to the bottom part. It goes down to the IRWIMP grants. And so those have been all through bonds that have been passed for a few years now, more than a decade. And they have provided some money to do planning and to do implementation of actual projects on a competitive basis. But you have to have that IRWIMP plan to be able to even apply for this money. And so you have to be working together, you have to have a plan together to be able to do this. And they said in the past that we would really encourage this, and when I say they, I mean the Department of Water Resources in the state of California, they really wanted the disadvantaged communities to be involved and to be heard and to have projects, and so they would set aside some money for some projects, but it wasn't really a true way of getting the involvement that was needed. So they said in this last bond that I mentioned earlier in 2014, they developed an actual program that's called Disadvantaged Community Involvement Program. It doesn't guarantee, physical projects. What it does is to try to get people involved and engaged and heard and participating in all of these aspects under this IRWIMP program. So, like I said, they approved this program and said 10%, a minimum of 10% of that last water bond for the area would be for this program specifically. It had to be used for involvement program, involving the disadvantaged communities in all of these watershed and region projects and so on and so forth. So the trick here was, this time they said, you have $9.8 million, but it's not just going to be for greater LA, it's going to be for the $9.8 million for this entire area. Is quite large. Oops, I have to go back one. Go back. How can I go back? Who's the guru? Is there somebody that can help me go back? My apologies. Oh, here we go. Is this it? Go back. I'm sorry. Oh, it's not a touch screen. Oh Oh, maybe there's an elevator right here. I think that's it right there. Okay, so you had it. There we go. Thank you. Okay, thank you very much. So the DACIP, the Disadvantaged Community Involvement Program, for this funding area, as I mentioned, is quite large. So you have, as I mentioned, the Greater LA County, the Ventura, and the Upper Santa Clara River. The golden colors are what I'm working with in that section, along with those two other regions. And the way to become involved, we're trying to develop as we speak, but currently what we have is a governance, which is the Greater LA County Irwin Leadership Committee. And then that represents all of the sub-regions of Greater LA County. And then we have even sub-regional committees, so that they get together and talk about what their sub-regional needs are. And then you have the Greater LA DAC Committee, the Disadvantaged Community Committee, which represents all of the sub-regions of Greater LA County. We have non-governmental organizations participating in those in the committee as well. And one of the folks well, let me rephrase that. The reason why I've highlighted the last two is because that's where the lack is. We need more non-government organizations and local community leaders and DAC community leaders and city leaders and local groups participating. And so ideally, all 5 of those would not have to be bold-faced like at the bottom. That's the part of the disadvantaged community involvement we're trying to improve upon, are those last 2 boxes. The disadvantaged community involvement program goals are to strengthen relationships and engagement with disadvantaged communities and develop long-term working relationships. To identify the disadvantaged communities that we don't know about and to engage them in relationships and opportunities that, they don't know who we are. We're just somebody sitting in a meeting. That needs to change. We need to support and engage their involvement in watershed planning, identifying their water-related needs, and ultimately working together to assist them in developing needed projects and plans. And lastly, to assist and support the disadvantaged communities in securing potential funding from the state or local or feds, wherever that might come from. The biggest gap that we have now is not only just the relationships and the involvement, but the funding needed to get a project ready to be able to get funding. That's the biggest gap. They don't have design money. They don't have money to get to see if a project is viable. That is the part that's missing, and hopefully with the engagement and relationships and helping to identify their needs, we can help get them to a point where a project is ready for when a grant is available. So what can the $9.8 million grant be spent on? There's 10 things. One is required by the state, and that's a needs assessment. They really want to see an actual report that shows you went out to the community and you found out all of these things and put it in a matrix and put it in a database that's usable and interactive. They want that. They want us to spend it on community outreach, education, facilitation, technical assistance, project development, site assessment, and engagement in the IRWIMP efforts. And to also enhance the disadvantaged community aspects in all of the plans in the IRWIMPs that we have, those 3 regions I talked about in the funding area. And also look at what we can do to improve the governance structures to involve everyone. So the first task that we have before us is the community outreach and involvement. We've kind of gone through that list of 10 things and kind of identified and prioritized, what we need to do first, second, and third. And this is the first one, is to create a robust outreach program, develop hard copy and digital materials, meet and listen to the communities throughout the greater LA area, identify and engage them, involve them, and build long-term working relationships. We shouldn't just look at how long is this grant going to last, let's get it done, and then there's nothing else. This needs to be building long-term, trusting, two-way relationships. And the second task that we're going to be doing is designing that needs assessment based on all of that community outreach in task 1. We're then going to gather all that information and from all those activities that will be going over the period of 3 years, by the way. We're not going to just do it right at the beginning. It's going to be throughout. We want to go back and we want to talk to people. We're not just going to go say, hey, tell me what you need, and then we'll write it and put it in a needs assessment. No, no, no. We want to go back and tell them what we learned. Do you have something that you can add now that we've learned more? We want to create an interactive database, and we want to develop that needs assessment report to support all of these deficiencies that are listed down below. Okay. Okay. And I'm almost done. So this task 3 right there is, I won't even go into detail because that's going to be the last wave of activities. And so finally, I just want to say the DACIP program, the grant, is a 3-year funding. It starts, for us in Greater LA County, it's going to start February, March with the development of all the outreach materials. And it's going to start with setting up workshops, door-to-door meetings, and social media presentations, and other. And we're going to ask you for input later in the program. And then lastly, this is my personal goal, is to start with listening, caring, and building trusting long-term relationships. And that's the end of my